All right. Well, this chapter is actually one of my least favorite, not because of the topic that we're discussing, but because of the fact that, seeing these kinds of things is very bothersome to me. Is that, I'm sure it is to most anybody, really. And it isn't just that it's in the ocean. The ocean happens to be obviously my favorite place, but it doesn't mean it's any less disturbing when it happens on land. But it always seems to me, or at least it seems to me, that when it happens on water, or happens in the ocean, it seems to always be so big, right? And what we're going to talk about is marine pollution. It's not just oil. This is obviously, disgusting. It's horrible to look at, the huge oil spill that you see there. And the picture in the upper right, by the way, is the Deepwater Horizon back in what was it, 2010, right? Deepwater, that's the gushing pipe way down at how many? I don't know. Somewhere on there it says depths. 4,000, about 5,000 meters. 15,000 feet, right? Or would they be? No, they probably were measuring in meters. Anyway, so that's the oil was gushed out of that broken pipeline because they got it fixed. Now you're gonna learn today, actually, to be honest, that the most of the oil that we find in the oceans is actually there naturally, or is not dumped there by these kinds of things. These kinds of things get the big press, obviously, because they're much more concentrated. But that's what I was saying. Yeah, I think that's meters. I'm pretty sure they must be using, just to say measurement option. I can't tell, but anyway. But and these are the things that get the press. But we're going to find out that what I mean by this idea of when I think about ocean pollution as being so big is the fact that it's really big and it's silent and it's kind of like what they call silent diseases. Oh gosh, I'm sorry. This is chlamydia, right? Chlamydia is a sexually transmitted disease, but it's what we call a silent disease because males with chlamydia are asymptomatic. Okay, so it doesn't really show. And so you don't know if you got it, right? So that's what we mean by that. So to me, the pollution, other than, this is like having obviously a cut on your arm where it's very localized where it is. To me, the pollution I worry about most is the stuff that spreads out over the entire ocean. That we don't see it in big things like this, the stuff, all this stuff, not just the garbage, right? See, pollution is more than just oil or PCBs or DVDs or any of them other DDs or any of those other chemicals that we always hear about leaking in the ocean. Pollution is anything out there that causes damage. It's nets, right? It's monofilament. Oh God, that stuff is awful. Excuse me. It's a leaking a guy's. Oh gosh, what's wrong with me? The engine on a boat, a leaking engine on a boat, leaking oil into the water. It's any of those kinds of things, right? Because it's anything chemically, it's anything structurally, nets, right, wouldn't be chemically, although they can decompose and cause problems and they're made out of things that aren't biodegradable. Anything that can, have harm to marine life, anything that can reduce the sea quality, and not just, stuff floating in it and the accidental ingestions that sometimes happen. We all know, I guess that's one of the things in Florida that's good, I guess, is the fact that we all seem to, as a whole, be much more aware of this kind of stuff. Like, we're all pretty aware of the problems with plastics in the ocean, which I'll talk more about later. But that's it. The problem with that many times is chemical, but it's also ingestion. Organisms eat these things because they think they're food, right? And in the case of the plastics, like the plastic bags, it's the poor sea turtles. Because what do sea turtles normally eat? What do the sea turtles around Florida, many of the species, typically, what's their typical prey? I should see if I can find a picture of the inside of a throat of a sea turtle. Some do. I mean, they nibble on grass. No, and again, some of that. But what's one of their principal prey? You might not even think of it as an animal that they prey upon. So don't think about what would they confuse with a jellyfish then? Or doggone, Freudian slip. What would they confuse with a plastic bag? It's jellyfish, right? Jellyfish are one of the principal problems in plastic ingestion in marine sea turtles, and it causes impaction, right? It blocks up their digestive system. And they die from it. And plastic sandwich bags floating in the ocean, hell yeah, that looks like a jellyfish, right? Okay, so those kinds of things. An environmental bioassay is maybe what you might think about as a biopsy on a lump if you were a human being. It's basically an experiment or a survey or an observations in which we go out and try to figure out how much we've screwed it up already, okay? Sometimes these things just end up doing that, and sometimes these things, which is the good part of it, spark legislation, and we'll talk about that some today too. They spark ideas about how to fix these things. It's not just disgusting to look at, right? We've all been to the beach. Hopefully you haven't been to one like this, but we all know that even just the garbage on the beach we see around here sometimes is disgusting, and we know it's probably harmful. Now, what environmental bioassays do, one of the things that they do is they determine something. This is interesting because it's a real buzzword in toxicology, right? Called an LD50. Anybody ever heard of it? Something referred to as the LD50. If you took maybe an environmental science class, you might have heard talk of that LD50. Amy or Anthony, you guys have never heard of an LD50 ACE? It's a very macabre definition. It means lethal dose 50, okay? And what it's defined at in the world of toxicology is if you were testing, let's say, a pesticide or something that could kill something on, let's say, lab mice. LD50 would be what the dosage would be that would kill off 50% of your lab rats. So whatever you're using as your guinea pig, you see what I mean? Literally. Lethal dose, DOSE. So if it took 10 milligrams of substance X to kill 50 of your 100 rabbits, then we said and then we rank things compared to them. And then we use that, believe it or not, to set standards on human beings as what we could ingest. If we said, all right, the LD50 of this stuff is like, less than a millionth of a millionth of a millionth of a millionth of a gram, we ain't gonna let you put it in food. But if the LD50 is something like 80 pounds, okay, we're gonna let you put it in food. But you understand the macabre part is how they get to that number, right? You just start poisoning them rats until you kill, until you kill off half of them. Poor rats. The drawbacks of these kinds of environmental assays is the fact that it says what you can do to kill 50% of your rats today. It doesn't say what you're going to do to those rats that might affect their offspring. So it doesn't say anything about, long-term effects on the populations of the organisms. It doesn't say anything about what's going to happen as stuff gets accumulated or bioaccumulated, which we'll talk about. So it's a real rough measure, obviously. And when we're looking at the ocean, holy cow, you're talking about being off just a little bit, and the ocean being so big, that's gonna magnify the air, isn't it? You guys ever heard this word? Well, no, we did. We talked about it. Oh my gosh, when we were doing tides, remember that really screwy word, SZY, syzygy or something like that? Here's a word like it. Synergism, in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way, kind of a joking way. People say synergism is this. I'm gonna type it out. If you were to think about synergism in a numerical addition problem, this is synergism. See what I typed. See what I typed. Password of type. What did I type? 2 + 2 = 5. That's not right, right? 2 + 2 = 4. So last I checked. But what we say with synergism is, for example, let's say, okay. That's many times if you're taking certain medications, it might say don't use alcohol when you're taking this medication. All right. So the alcohol is a sedative. The medication is maybe a sedative. You're right. Maybe it's a muscle relaxer. You hurt your back or something like that. And either one together probably isn't a big deal, but together they're a really big deal. They're a really big deal. Or the classic example that our mothers used on us. Now, this is dating myself well before you guys. There was a young girl, Karen Ann Quinlan. Oh, my gosh. She went out on her 21st birthday, and could drink, and was drinking and taking tranquilizers, Quaaludes, I think it was, which is all very much from the disco era. But anyway, synergistically, something went really bad in this woman, and she ended up in a coma for, oh gosh, a decade or something. It was what our parents used to scare us, about drug use and alcohol use back when I was a kid. It wasn't the boogeyman under the bed who like, you'll end up like Karen Ann Quinlan, which is a shame because you could. And the truth of the matter is synergism is not something you would expect. Everybody's taken maybe a sedative and then maybe alcohol and maybe aspirin or anything like that. Or, it's one of those things where you think, okay, well, it's two small sedatives, two rather mild sedatives. For some reason, something chemically happens and you get this boom, Yeah, that's exactly right. Oh, what's the other one? Oh, it's the cleaning stuff. You're not supposed to put bleach with ammonia. You guys ever heard of that? Especially if you're in a confined area. If you put bleach in with ammonia, it makes, and that's like deadly because they used it in World War I to kill people. It's basically like inhaling mustard, which, mustard tastes good, but it's kind of burns, doesn't it, Yeah, exactly. So that's what I mean by synergism. You think, what, bleach and ammonia? Come on, put them together. My mother, holy cow, the way she would, oh, that'd have been great. Let's do all that, But so that's what we mean by it in the ocean. And we don't know down to chemical level when we're getting a 2 + 2 = 5 kind of thing. You're, time consuming time. And remember, time is money, right? Or time is money. Either one, whatever those folks say. But it costs money to go out and sample the ocean. It isn't like Joe going into the doctor, here's Joe, you can sample him, he's right here, but it's the ocean. It's kind of big. Half the time too, at the bottom, what it says there, organism specific, half the time what we're looking at is something we're looking at one critter and the effect it might be having on that one critter. We're not understanding, does it have an effect on the entire ecosystem? If you remove like certain bottom dwelling kind of critters, not bottom of the ocean, but bottom of the food web, you could cause some real problems, right? We talked about keystone species, remember? Did we? Species that are really important in an ecosystem. They're all important, but these are the ones that, like, if you took them and you killed them, it would cause it to collapse, okay? So sometimes, that's what we need to look at. So what we'll turn to next is the different kinds of pollution, okay? So there's the petroleum, right? We all know about oil. Yes, and oil's a problem. Don't get me wrong. It is an absolute problem. Sludge. And then I had a buddy of mine in the Navy all the time. In the military or military theory, there are 3 types of alternative weapons other than shooting you. Again, I'm sorry for the macabre topics, but it's called NBC warfare: nuclear, biological, and chemical. Okay, so we nuke biological, like, anthrax. Chemical would be DDTs. And my buddy used to always say it's the biological ones that are the biggest problem. Okay. And in the ocean, the pollution sources, probably one of the biggest problems. It's not the ones we see necessarily, like the sludge and the petroleum, all them little invisible molecules that are floating around and synergizing with each other. And they got these horrible names that we're going to talk about. DDT, which stands for, I'm not even going to try to do it without the word in front of me, PCBs. And again, there's all them CDBs things and those are, what is that thing I read about knowing if you're eating good food? If you can't pronounce in the ingredients the stuff that's in whatever you're buying to eat, you probably shouldn't be eating it. Right? Did you ever play with mercury when you were a kid? Anybody? Like in chemistry lab? Oh, teachers would yell at you, but it's that, what I'm talking about, mercury. No? Oh, they probably don't. I bet you in this society anymore, they don't even let you even get anywhere near mercury. Anyway, I'll talk about that. I'll show you. But mercury was really cool and fun to play with, but there's a reason why you shouldn't play with it. Yeah, when it broke out, you know what I mean? Didn't you ever get a broken thermometer and mercury makes like little metallic balls. When you can push it around and it's like jello. Of course, like I said, it's hard to accumulate that much. Yeah, I love. Oh yeah, my grandmother did too. In like the in like a jewelry box. You had a little lump of mercury. That was neat. Anyway, not supposed to play with that stuff, but it depends on how much, right? Yeah, no. But it's cool, man. I enjoy playing with it. Anybody have any idea what we mean by like everything else we did, non-point source pollution? What do we mean? What do you think we mean when we say non-point source pollution? I think it's even abbreviated, NPN, non, or no, that wouldn't make sense. That's actually pretty. That's actually pretty good. Yeah, that's probably the result of it being non-point source, right? Yeah. Why don't you think we care about it, Chantel, or anybody else? Why do you think that is? Right. Yeah, it's non-point, but yeah, right. There you go. You guys are getting in the right place. Ace, you touched on something that we always worry about in environmental science called the tragedy of the commons. And the tragedy of the commons is a, what do you call it, story, parable? I don't know what it is. But back in the days when the first folks came over from Europe in this country, they settled in villages, and there would be a common area that everybody's cows or sheep, or I guess it wouldn't have been cow, I don't know, whatever they were doing, would graze. Okay? And nobody took care of this area necessarily. Everybody took care of it. It was the common area. Well, we have a behavioral idea or behavioral concept in environmental science called the tragedy of the commons, which means basically if nobody is responsible for it, nobody takes care of it. Okay, so in non-point source pollution, it's all those things that you're talking about that nobody pays attention. You can't, it's hard to control because non-point sources, where does it come from? Well, we don't know. If we can point to a leaking oil well, if we can point to a sewage treatment plant, if we can point to a ship run aground, that's point source, right? But if we go, where does all this X come out in the ocean, right? Where does it all come from? Well, from here, there, everywhere, and okay, I'm kind of giving it away, but what do you think is the biggest cause of oil in the ocean? Where do you, a source? What's the biggest source of oil in our oceans? Okay, anybody else? Like leaks and stuff and all that, not just the big leaks too, but the little leaks that, everything kind of leaks sometimes. Yeah. Anybody else? Anybody else got an idea? Anybody else think it's because remember, we got oil tankers, we got pipelines that run under. Huh? Why whales? Anybody else? Amy? Everybody else? Chantel, what do you, let's all do this together now. Let's all, it's almost like we're in grade school. Huh, that's interesting though, again, because it isn't. However, you are touching on the idea that the biggest producer, the biggest source of oil pollution in the ocean is you and me. Consumption. That's the number one consumption. Using it, spilling a little bit on the ground at a gas station, at 1 billion gas stations, times 1 billion people using them every day. Da, 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 da. You get the idea? People not taking their oil to dump sites to have it properly disposed of, but dumping it in their backyard. Okay, leaking oil coming out of boat engines. How much? I mean, maybe not the big cruise lines, although they leak a lot too. But you think how many ships are on the ocean? Think how many boats are on the ocean? Think how many of those are engines are in disrepair, and then multiply it. Right? Isn't that amazing? It really is just a little source times a bunch of us. Okay, so then we'll talk biological pollution, which basically is not so much necessarily a chemical or nasty or, you know, or any of that kind of stuff, but it's like, you think about it as living things being where they're not supposed to be. Okay, so invasives, we had a big problem with that in Florida. Okay, so hydrocarbons are oils, right? That's organic material. And organic material means that it came from living things, at least in this context. It's remnants of ancient critters, right? And they died and they sank to the bottom and they were pressurized and they were heated and they were melted. That's what they were done. They were melted. That's what it became. They became oil and they melted. And it's underground. And for many years, humans, we thought it was garbage. Because there's lots of places, again, I go with the Italian. There's lots of places that oil naturally seeps out of the ground. Lots of it's in the ocean. Look, 47% of the oil in the ocean is from natural seepages. 47%. That's natural. It's naturally leaking up through oil reservoirs because rocks aren't impermeable. Things leak up. And of course, with oil, there's methane because that's a hydrocarbon. Hydrocarbons are things like in the right with these big names, N-paraffin, isoparaffin. I'm in the upper right. The naphthenes. These are all components of gasoline, by the way. These are all, and there you can see their chemical symbols, chemical diagrams. Whatever the hell that's called in chemistry. Anyway, so the oil's all leaking up through the rocks, right? And so that's all very natural. And all this oil is naturally produced and all this kind of stuff. And for many years, we humans thought it was just a waste of time and all this sort of stuff until we figured out it burned. And then we went, woo, that's awesome. Until we figured out that we could turn turbines and, you know, turbines and all this kind of stuff. It is organic. That is true. And that means it can be biodegraded. And that is good because a lot of the oil that seeps into the ocean through natural stuff is biodegraded. You think biodegraded by what? There are a lot of naturally oil-eating bacteria. I'll show you a few of them, which, of course, we're very interested in, right? We can use those. So where does a lot of the oil come from? Well, a lot of it, you know, the sources is extraction. You know, there's the Gulf of Mexico thing that we'll talk about back in 2010. The Exxon Valdez before your time. Exxon Valdez would have probably been the first in my generation of scientists, if you think. I was in grad school when that happened. Or no, I just finished. But anyway, so it was the first, you know, real time I could understand it at that level. So it was very highlighting to me, or very highlighting. Anyway, impactful. Consumption, right? That's one of the number one. Look at that. Now, a natural seepage is about 50%, but what I mean is of the human sources that you see there on the right, okay, let me scroll down, the consumption of petroleum is up 3/4 of that, just about half. See, not extraction. You all said the oil drillers? No, Transportation, ships that run aground, we hear about them, the Exxon Valdez. Extraction would have been the Deepwater Horizon. Pipelines that run under ocean that leak. No, that only makes up, what, 28? Most of it's consumption, spilling it, pouring it on the ground, using it as dust abatement. You ever heard of them doing that? Dust abatement in if you live near with a lot of dirt roads, they would squirt oil down on the road to keep the dust from kicking up, especially in the summertime. Did a lot of my family's land, or family's land, well, their land, yeah, yes. But I have a lot of ranchers in my family in Texas, and they would use oil. I hope they don't anymore. Stuff runs off into the ditches. You know, what did Nemo say? All drains lead to the ocean, right? So anything that drains goes out the rivers, and, you know, again, times a million, times a million, times a million, times a million people, right? Do it that way. So it is you and I, like the old cartoon that we have met the enemy and they is us. Let me shrink this down. Oh no, I want to keep it up. Okay, so you got the oil bubbling up, and again, there's methane and all that sort of stuff. And oil is good. Oil is good, right? We need it for, but we certainly don't need to be eating it, even though they, you know, can modify it. And we do end up eating a lot of our food. The things that are bad for you in petroleum have these lovely names like polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. That nice? Aromatic hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbon is because they have hydrogen and carbon. Aromatic. Oh, what does that mean? oh, I can't remember, but polycyclic means lots of circles, lots of, you see over here, they're in circles, not really circles, but hexagons. Yes, hexagons. Doesn't take a lot of this stuff to make you sick, and that's the short term. The long term, woo, the worst thing is the gene messing with your genetic information, because the problem with that is that affects you, affects your offspring, you down the road, okay, leading to all kinds of things that we don't want, we don't necessarily want to be, doing to our human population. Obviously, there's the. Hold on a second. Okay, Coop, thank you. I don't need a doorbell. What was I saying? Oh, yeah, you don't want to be ingesting this stuff, Even if it's not affecting you today, it can be affecting you later. It can be affecting later generations. There are lots of examples out there. Go look up, oh, geez. The Foster Grant sunglass people. Love Canal. Go look that up. I think there was a movie about it, too. Look up Love Canal. Okay, so oil, what's the bottom line here? Oil gets into the ocean. There is natural. A good half of it is natural. We do have means to help us if there are spills, because since it's natural, there are things that eat it. Remember, it's a source of energy, so we wouldn't have been the first things to come along to go, woo, right? Little bacteria that can eat it, which is what they do. They can use it as a source of energy, right? Okay, so let's move along here. There's the big spills. Valdez, 44 million. Let's go with gallons. 12 million gallons. Ixtoc 1, that was a leak of oil drilling platform leak, like Deepwater Horizon. Ah, jeez. Anyway, so you skip the Gulf War and you realize, isn't that amazing? When it was all said and done, after they closed up all the pipelines and everything, over 1 billion gallons were spilled. So that's 5 Deepwater Horizons, intentionally. But like I said, over here on the right, oil input from other sources, okay? So this is in the United States and globally, 1.4 billion liters, 380 million gallons. All right, so other than those catastrophic things like the Persian Gulf, on an annual basis, year to year, we release more oil than the Deepwater Horizon did. And it didn't go, well, did it go a year? Can't remember how long it went before they finally got it capped off. All right, what's the bottom line in all this, I guess? Well, let's look at a couple of these examples first, and then we'll talk about ways to fix all this, okay? Prince William Sound in 1989, the Exxon Valdez, a oil tanker ran aground on Bligh Reef. You can see the picture in the upper right. There were rumors that the captain was drunk and was asleep in the back, and that the, what do you call him, first mate was actually navigating out of Bligh Reef. I guess, if I remember correctly, the oil companies said that that wasn't unusual for that to happen in an area like that, that it was a relatively easy navigation to do. And so first mates could do it, but the captain was still supposed to be on the deck. And of course he wasn't, because he was drunk. I can't remember if that was rumored or if he was eventually convicted or something like that. 12 million gallons, 1,100 miles of shoreline, countless numbers, horrible sea, soaked in oil. The mollusks, the clams, the oysters, the things that couldn't move, the things that were filter feeders were basically just suffocated in this gooey black material. They need a bigger picture, but the problem is when in Bligh Reef, oh man, you can see here is the Exxon Valdez. It's all closed in. So when you see Prince William Sound is that little sound right there, and Bligh Reef is at the beginning. They were coming out of, what was the name of that town? Oh, shoot. Valdez, Exxon Valdez. Yep, they were coming out of Valdez. They hit, see how Bligh Reef is there? And then this is all, so everything was contained. A lot of the oil just stayed right in that area. It was horrible. It's terrible. And the animals just get covered in oil. Now they tried to clean it up, and one of the ways they did, spending lots and lots and lots of money. Look at that, 200 billion, and still not done. And actually, trying to get out of paying people they still owe money to. Anyway, the first thing they did is they sprayed hot water, but that was killing a lot of the species. You can imagine, right? Steam. I mean, yeah, you're blasting the oil off, but none of those critters necessarily live there. We're used to steam temperature water. That's a little bit warm, but you look at this is what it looked like when it was on. We had to get it off. So unfortunately, what happened is he killed a lot of them to save some of them, right? Yeah, absolutely could. I mean, look at the Deepwater Horizon, right? Deepwater Horizon was probably beneficial that it was offshore. If it had been closer in or in just a different little area in the Gulf, I'll show you the water, how the water flows through the Gulf. But yeah, of course it could. To be honest, when the Deepwater Horizon went off, I thought for sure that the Keys were dead. I thought for sure the Keys, the reef off of the Keys, that's our only continental reef. I thought for sure that was ruined. I didn't figure there's any way it was going to survive. And I mean ruined like forever too. But it didn't happen that way. And much as the oil company would like to take credit for, their response in preventing that, my guess is a lot of them guys are just thinking, phew, get lucky on that one. And the big thing about it, keeping in context there, is the fact that even though the oil looks like it's gone, it ain't gone. The oil in the Gulf of Mexico, there's still a lot there. This is Prince William Sound. I don't remember how long after. In the lower left, see that hole they've dug? It looks like it's with water, right? But that's not water. So there's oil still underground, if you will. So there's oil that's settled down through the dirt. Again, I don't know where I got that picture. It doesn't look like I got it out of your book, but I can't remember. From what I understand, even today, if you dig down far enough, there's still oil down below. Of course it does, yeah. So it all looks nice and pretty on the surface, right? Dig down just a little bit. And okay, for surface critters, that might be all right, but, well, it's not all right, even for them, because think about all the chemical reactions that are going on down through here, and all the bad things in oil, the toxic material that's in oil. So, of course, I put not a threat in question marks because they're going to tell you it's not a threat. But once again, here's the Deepwater Horizon. April, I think it was right before school got out in 2010, and now a major motion movie with was it Matt Damon, right? Isn't that who's in it? I'm sure they'll be seen as hero, and the guys going through all that, of course. But I mean, if you read some of the reports about why it even happened, it kind of makes you mad. Okay, the fact that the oil company was just using shortcuts, not taking care of things. So this is 200 million gallons, $40 billion. BP claims to have taken a quarter of the oil out. At least it doesn't look like there's much oil. They used a chemical dispersant. Yeah. Well, but remember the reason why they're doing that is because you're driving around your car. Okay, the real answer to any of these kinds of questions is supply and demand. We have to figure out some way to move ourselves off of these kinds of potentially or very dangerous fuels that we use, and that's why it's important that we think about that in the future. You see that red stuff, that's the chemical dispersant they used. And now what a chemical dispersant does, it doesn't make the oil vanish into thin air. It chops it up chemically, if you will, into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. So you don't see it. But chopping it up into small pieces doesn't mean you removed its toxicity. Doesn't mean you made it less damaging to the environment, okay? Just because you chopped up into little tiny pieces. And this is why I was telling you earlier that, oh man, I thought the reefs were dead. The Deepwater Horizon was just about here. And you remember when we talked about the currents, there's a loop current that runs through the Gulf of Mexico. See, there it is right there. And I thought for sure that oil was going to get picked up and going to end up just flowing down over the reef. And it would have killed the reef forever in our lifetime. It would have been dead. Now, for whatever reason, BP would love to take claim for quite a bit of the lack of disaster, I suppose, is a way to put it. And maybe they did do something. I'm concerned about all the stuff that dispersed because we don't really know what happened to even the other 75%. See, BP says they removed about a quarter. They removed about a quarter. That means they're 75% behind. Some of it they hit with a chemical dispersant. Where did the rest of it go? Some folks believe it's still there. If you look at the Gulf of Mexico kind of as a sideways, the ocean bottom here, that the oil has some suggest there's layers, these huge acres, miles of floating subsurface floating blobs of oil that are probably just doing all kinds of wonderful things to marine life. Okay, so, all right, I get it. I drive to work too, okay? I certainly don't want to hoof it. I live 45 miles away. If I could ride my bike, oh, God, I'd get killed on 46. I wouldn't do that. But let's talk about, first of all, let's talk about cleaning it up, and then we'll move on a little bit and maybe talk about very quickly some of the stuff we can do to prevent these kinds of things from happening, okay? You can skim it off the surface. I don't know what that does for all the other things. Again, it makes it look pretty. The dispersant we talked about. Yeah, Ace, I will tell you, though, that most of the gas stations that you buy gas around here all buy their oil from just a few distributors. So even though it's BP gas, you don't know that maybe 7-Eleven's gas might be that too or something. So you can research all that online. And to me, it's like I didn't buy Shell gasoline for the longest time because of their policies in South Africa. And you know, I don't buy Shell gas anymore. And I don't even know if there are Shell gas stations, but you know, it's the lesser of evils for sure. These are the bacteria. I like the name. Check out the name. Alcanivorax burkamensis. These are the naturally hydrocarbon digesting oil eating bacteria. They're bacteria. They're even fungus that are already there. Again, there was oil leaking into the ocean long before there was us. So, you know, what we do is we take these bacteria and we grow them in situ. In situ basically means we grow them in the lab. It would be like if you were getting seedlings ready for growing up forest, right? You bring them into the lab, you grow up these big vats of these bacteria, and then you inoculate, you spray it. You spray it all over the water. Since they're natural, since they're normal, since it's not anything we did in a lab, we don't have to worry about big, old Reptilicus. Reptilicus. Holy cow, when I was a kid, there was a movie. You're really bored one night, you want to pull it up on Netflix, look up Reptilicus, about this big lizard that came out of the ocean. Like a Tyrannosaurus. But anyway, since all this stuff is natural, we're not really worried about Reptilicus. But I do always worry when we begin to upset the natural balance. In other words, if we have an oil spill, we're going to have to dump a lot of these bacteria and fungi in that area. And even though they're naturally there, it's kind of like in Africa, even though lions are naturally there, if all of a sudden lions became 1 per square acre, there'd be a lot less humans, right? There'd be a lot less people around. This is guys cleaning up the BP, I believe. That looks like fun, right? Scraping the stuff off the ground. Okay, 1990, right after the Exxon Valdez, we said, okay, we've had enough. And Chantel asked earlier, would this happen again in the future? Let's take a look at a couple of things that might help us with that. First of all, the law, right? It defines responsibilities for damage and cleanup. Let's hit them in the pocketbook. Let's maybe make them think twice before they, I don't know, hire captains that drink too much. I guess the story again was that he had been busted once already, and it was kind of one of those, why didn't you get rid of him? I may have confused that with other things. There's been so many of those kinds of stories since the years, but there was some culpability of the captain other than running aground in the Exxon Valdez. But oil companies make a lot of money, and making them pay for things. You notice Exxon didn't go out of business, right? So that doesn't always do it, especially when we remember that if you really smack these companies real hard, what ends up is it trickles down into the poor workers. Folks that run these companies didn't get to the mansions they live in by giving their money away. Okay, they're gonna pass the cost on to us. All right. So one of the things we can make them do is make transportation safer using double-hulled tankers. Okay. See on the right, it's very simple to think about, right? You got an extra layer of a hull. Now, is it possible that the ship runs aground and pierces both of those? Yeah. Now, what do you think would be the oil company objection to requiring them to use double-hulled tankers? See, since since that time, single-hull tankers are no longer allowed in U.S. ports, even though France and Spain got smart. They don't even let them offshore, knowing that oil spills offshore still cause you problems. Why did the oil companies, why did they bitch about, excuse me, why were they upset about double hull tankers? They were eventually forced to do it. Yep, not only that, but to power them, they're heavier. Yep, that's right. And also to push them through the water, right? So they're heavier. But you know, we're a glutton for oil. We need oil. We're all, you know, we all like to think that and we do. Don't get me wrong. We do. We care about the environment, but not only if we stopped driving oil-consuming cars, gasoline-consuming cars, oils are in our plastics, oils are in our pharmaceuticals, oils are in everything. So, you know, you see a little cartoon there where the safety is kind of the little one in the train. That's where we've been. But like I said before, and I like the cartoon on the right, we have met the enemy, and it is us. It's not just Americans. It's the world. And now Americans are one of the biggest culprits because there's lots of us. But I like living in the society I live in, okay? I like living in the society I live in. And so therefore, like I said, I want to be able to drive to work. I don't know if I could get a horse-drawn carriage to take me up to Leesburg for school every day. And like I said, it'd be too far for me to ride my bike, and I get killed on 46. So I get all that. You know, and when it's hot in the middle of July, I want my AC on, you know. Yeah, exactly. So there's got to be a balance, right? There's got to be a way to kind of balance it out. And when it comes right down to it, preventing oil spills, the best thing to do is to decrease our dependence on oil, so that there's no market by which to move the stuff around, to pump the stuff around, or even to use it. Okay, that's all I'll talk about oils. I could go on and on about that, but let's talk about the really good stuff. Let's talk about sewage. Sludge. That just sounds good, doesn't it? This is also a major source of pollution. Now, here's a myth that you may or may not know sometimes. Depending on where you live in the world, and even depending on areas of the world that you think are whatever you classify as the first world versus third world, the amount of sewage treatment you have to do before you dump the stuff back into the ocean is variable. Many places, and most places that are regulated, demand at least primary treatment. Now, primary treatment is you bring all that nasty stuff in and you let it settle. All right, settles to the bottom. And then in some cases, in some places, you can skim that stuff up the top and dump it back into the ocean, dump it back into a river. I don't want to live downstream from that. But many times after that, they aerate it. And aerated is basically a sprinkler head passes over a bed of charcoal. Now, if you're wondering why charcoal, if you've ever looked at charcoal under a microscope, it's got lots of little pits. It's a very pitty rock, okay? And it's got lots of places for things to stick to. So what charcoal does is it sticks those nasty things together. So the nasty things stick on the charcoal. The aerator, which is the thing over top, squirts the water down. The water trickles through and it gets to the bottom. It's better, right? Because not only are you getting the charcoal, but on the charcoal, these bacteria are going to grow. And the bacteria many times are going to eat the stuff. And again, the water trickles through and it gets better. And then secondary treatment is just a sort of a clarification process. Let it settle one more time. And then chlorine is used. Ozone is used sometimes. Chlorinated water, that's like why the water out of the tap sometimes in Florida is, you know, if you let it sit for a while, the chlorine gas will dissipate. But the problem with all of this too is, say you get there to the end and the water's clean, right? Or relatively clean, or at least statutes clean, you know, allowed to be dumped back into the environment. What do you do with all that stuff that's settled in the aeration tank or in those two primary sedimentation tanks? Or excuse me, those two sedimentation tanks, the primary and then the secondary treatment, which involves the same thing, right? What do you do with all that human waste and zinc and copper and lead and, oh my goodness, all kinds of things that they find in you know, there's so many chemicals that get into the wastewater sometimes that it actually affects the environment. It affects, like, for example, reptiles and birth rates. It's incredible. I remember, oh, was it Chicago? I remember the river in Chicago when I was a kid catching on fire. It had so much stuff in it, you know, petroleum that caught on. And this was before the Clean Water Act of 1972. But the river actually caught on fire. I think it was Chicago. But that tells you something about, my goodness. Okay, now the Clean Water Act also turned our sites out into the ocean, you see, because for years we would dump water or dump our garbage out there because out of sight, out of mind. Now, here's the problem. Look at the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. What we're looking at is the sites are moving a little further offshore each time. So they're dumping in 1, they're dumping in 2, they're dumping in 3, and then dumping in 4. They're still dumping in 4. Okay. So good. Take it out to the ocean and dump it. Now, right away, look at that. What are some problems with doing that, do you think? What are some drawbacks to dumping it in the ocean? And think beyond just biological. Those are the easy ones. Think along the lines of societal or even economic. Because when you put those things together, you'll realize why this is a big problem. Even when you're dumping out in 4, which is beyond 1,000-meter depth, I mean, you're in that's the continental slope at that point, folks. That's the shelf at 200 meters. Sure, that can happen. Yeah, that's one of them. Okay, and especially if it's like medical waste, we've heard about that. What else? So even though you take it dozens or hundreds of miles out to sea, it can come back to haunt you. It's like Peterson when he killed his wife and he threw her in the ocean. She floated back ashore. That's what happened. That's called karma, buddy. Okay, so what else? Think about it. What else is the problem of? Well, yeah. Okay, so it's not biodegradable and it's toxic, no doubt, at least good chunks of it. So relate that to that not being good, obviously. Relate that to where it's being dumped, and do you see a problem? Those little pictures, I put those little pictures in there, and I don't think they came out as well as I wanted to. But can you see what those pictures are? The little white pictures I interspersed among the places where they used to dump trash. What kind of boats? Can you see what kind of boats they might be? Oh, crud. There we go. The landlubbers. They're fishing boats, okay? They're fishing boats, right? So put that together. Put that together with where the fish. We've talked about the ocean before. Where's most of the productivity in the ocean? It's not out in the middle, is it? It's mostly near shore, where plants can grow, ecosystems can develop. There's something to eat. So when fishing boats go out to fish, to collect fish, where are they going to find? Where are they going to find most of the fish? Right there in the middle of it, huh? Right there in the middle of it. It's like crapping in your own backyard, folks. Dumping. Can you imagine? Can you imagine doing that? Can you imagine before dinner tonight that before you get that pizza, you're gonna dump it in the garbage, and then you're gonna take it out and eat it, or you're gonna dump garbage out. I can't. My analogy's not working, but you get the idea, right? It's crapping in your own backyard. So you're dumping that fish. Or dumping that fish. You're dumping that garbage right there where you're collecting fish, and all that stuff's getting into the water, getting into the ecosystem, getting into the environment, and guess what? It's coming back up into the fish. Then you're catching the fish, and you're feeding it to humans. That's why they found chemicals, folks, industrial chemicals in the tissues of Eskimos, who are nowhere near where these chemicals are made, because it gets into the whales. It gets into the fish, and the fish that eat the fish, and the whales eat the fish, and it ends up in their blubber layer. And that's how the Eskimos were getting it. Okay, now also think about this economically. So, okay, fine. Everybody dump your garbage further offshore. Look, number 4 site is still being used. Go way out in the middle of the ocean, not just at the 1,000 meters. Go out where the Titanic is. Go out there by the mid-Atlantic rift. Maybe you can dump it into the rift, and the lava will destroy it. Why wouldn't that fly? Why wouldn't that work? Just go further. Go further. Go, 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 go. Not so close in. There you go. Balance, balance, balance. Right. Every mile you go out to sea is cost. So, you know, if you lived along these communities that were dumping their garbage out to sea and they said, hey, folks, we're going to go dump it in the mid-Atlantic Rift Valley, and that means your taxes are going to go up $10,000 a year versus dump it in the backyard. It's going to cost you, you know, whatever, right? So there's problems there. Oh, my goodness, it's never easy. And okay, now, this is kind of related to sewage because oftentimes in sewage, this is the source of it, right? These things called POPs, things that don't go away. Persistent organic pollutants. Organic, in this context, is going to refer to the fact things that get into life. Okay, that's the bad part. It affects things like food webs through this process called bioaccumulation or biomagnification. We'll talk about that, but remember, the way it works out there in food webs is as you move up the food web, you have to eat more of that that's below. Okay, that's the way the ecosystem is set up, and that really screws it the ecosystem when it comes to things like DDTs and PCBs. There's DDT, dichloro diphenyl trichloroethane. It sounds healthy. It was a pesticide, a great pesticide. Going back to cost for a second, right? Taking too much money. What a farmer wants in a pesticide is what we call a broad spectrum pesticide. Broad spectrum. Kills lots of things, okay? You probably, if you buy rape, ant and roach killer. You need ant killer and roach killer? No, you need, right? I'm just going to buy the ant. It's a broad spectrum. But broad spectrum pesticides kill all the bad insects, but not all insects are bad. Pollinating bees aren't bad. Okay, we've heard about the problem that's associated with that. So DDT was a really good, inexpensive, broad spectrum pesticide. It basically took us out of the Dust Bowl era. You know, that 30s when everything was just really awful and they made those movies. Grapes of Wrath. And of course, it was so popular that the use increased, and our crop yields went up. And we thought, oh my goodness, we found the mecca of everything. We don't have to worry about, you know, these things moving through. Yeah, the bees as well. And then we found out this problem was happening. The bird population was crashing. Silent Spring, written by Rachel Carson. The reason why she called it Silent Spring was she said that someday if we don't stop using DDT, there ain't going to be no birds no more. There's not going to be any more singing. Okay, and she was absolutely right. The problem with DDT that, okay, maybe nobody could have foresaw was the fact that DDT was causing birds to lay abnormally thin eggs, abnormally thin shells on their eggs. And so when the eggs were being incubated and mom was moving around, very often or too often she broke the egg. And then, of course, the baby died. Right? So good that we figured that out. The brown pelican is one of them that actually survived from that. The brown pelican was endangered in 1970. And remember, folks, getting on the endangered species list is not supposed to be a death sentence. Organisms that are put on the endangered species list are required, the federal government requires that a species survival plan be figured out for them. How can we get them back? How can we get them delisted? Now, DDT was banned in 72, but still was used, especially overseas. So I guess, you know, we were producing it in this country, not using it here, but shipping it overseas. Again, this whole microcosm view we have of the world, which is awful. Now, people said DDT was healthy. Oh, you could eat it. It didn't bother you back then. But now we're realizing long-term effects, like I talked about below or before. Karma, even in chemistry, is a bitch, okay? Polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs. Let's just call them nasty-ass industrial chemicals, okay? Liquid coolant, insulation. Sorry for my language, folks. This gets me pretty fired up. Paint, caulking, all those things that we need in our day-to-day life. All those things that we're learning through time cause these kinds of mutations. Liver cancers and mutations, reproductive problems, inability for males to produce enough sperm, inability for females to carry young to term like the sea lions in Escambia Bay and the miscarriages from all these things. Polychlorinated biphenyls were found in wells here in Florida. I mean, and if it affects, organisms that way, it's one of those things that, well, I guess I'm saying we're all in this together. Us humans are the ones creating it, but it's really kind of overbearing for us to assume that the rest of the world out there wants to bear the brunt for us doing that. The pelicans didn't ask to lay abnormally thin shell legs. I'm not trying to be silly here, but we are all here together. Okay? Not just the humans. The PCBs were banned, not in all countries, found all over the place. They're fat soluble, so they dissolve in fats and oils. Look at so the pelicans delisted in 2009, and look what happens. Here's the pelican population. Even though it started declining in 2006, it's one of those things again where people argue. Well, it was the Deepwater Horizon that caused the big crash. Does Deepwater Horizon happen in 10? Remember, okay? The big crash in Louisiana Pelicans was the Deepwater Horizon, and BP analysts will come out and say, well, no. You'll notice that the population of pelicans in Louisiana was decreasing even far back as, 2006, 4 years before the Deepwater Horizon? Well, one of the major reasons why those pelicans were decreasing even back then was local oil spills, things you don't hear about. A lot of time when oil is spilled, it's not the pelican out there flying up and down the beach that's affected. It's the nesting pelican. It's the eggs. It's the young. So the pelican population was already starting to feel some effects of these local oil spills, which probably came about because a little bit of laxing of the rules, right, or increased production, and then along comes the Deepwater Horizon. Boom! So that's how these populations, that's how these kinds of organisms, are sometimes so tenuous, so close to being endangered. Oh, there it is. See, there's the little balls of mercury I was talking about. Now, all kidding aside, mercury's not anything funny. It's natural. Volcanic eruptions. It's a natural occurring. Leaching is water soaking through the dirt and dissolving out the mercury, if you will. Anthropogenic, right? Us. So a lot of it, there's a lot of mercury in fossil fuels, coals, and when you burn those, they get into the atmosphere. When you get in the atmosphere, they form this compound called methyl mercury. Now, the mercury we played with as kids in the thermometer was not great for you. If you played with it a lot, it'd be a problem. But methyl mercury, that form of mercury is the worst. Methyl mercury causes something called Minamata disease. It was named this because back in the 30s, there was a chemical company in Japan that was releasing methyl mercury, and these folks were coming down with these horrible, horrible disorders like neurological. Mercury is like heavy metal poisoning. A lot of neurological and renal, that's kidney. Something about how much mercury, I thought it was kind of neat. I was reading it like, maybe it wasn't in your book. In order to get enough mercury with those little balls of mercury we played around with in school, we would have had to basically have it injected, I think it said. Methyl mercury, too, also one of the problems, not only just getting into the atmosphere and that kind of stuff, is it gets incorporated into living organisms, right? That's that whole bioaccumulation, biomagnification thing, right? So here's what I mean by that. So on the left is what we call a pyramid of energy. And what that pyramid of energy says, and a pyramid of biomass, they're related to one another, is you got the primary producers at the bottom, plants, right? Those that eat the plants, the herbivores, things that eat those, the carnivores, and so on and so forth. You don't go too far up, and then up at the top it says you got an apex. Okay? Now, the pyramid idea is, if you look out there in the environment, we find that there are lots of plants, a little fewer herbivores, even a little fewer carnivores, and moving on up to the apex predator. Think about how many red-tailed hawks you see in an environment. You see, they're kind of spread out. They're not like dozens of sparrows sitting on a line. Certainly not like all these grass, your lawn growing out, right? So this is what we call the pyramid of biomass. Now, the pyramid of biomass and the pyramid of energy are related, and this is related to pesticides. You'll see in a minute. What the pyramid of energy says is, because energy transfer, because when I eat something, I get energy from it. But that process, because it's not 100% some of that energy is lost, and actually most of it is lost between levels, between producers, consumers, primary consumers, the herbivores that eat the producers. About 90% of the energy is lost. So if there were, let's say, energy can be measured in calories. Let's say there were 100 calories of plants that were eaten by a consumer, okay, a herbivore. Only, what did I say, 100? Only 10 calories of that could that herbivore use for its own needs. The rest of it is lost. It's lost before it even gets to the herbivore because of waste products coming out of these organisms. It's lost through heat, especially if you're a mammal, because you generate heat. You see, so this pyramid of biomass and energy related, it says that any ecosystem cannot have a lot of top predators. Any ecosystem has to have a lot of plants. Does that make sense to anybody? Or anybody? Does it make sense to anybody? Does it make sense to everybody? You may have seen this before too. I know they talk a lot about it in science classes. So I need to lay this framework here before I can tell you about bioaccumulation and magnification. Does everybody understand that? Everybody eats more of that below them. Ah, that's actually pretty good. Questions? Everybody fall asleep on me? Amy, did you fall asleep? No? No questions? Good. All right. Now, if you understand the way that works, if you understand what I just said, that everybody's got to eat more of that beneath them, below them, right? Secondary consumers have to eat more primary consumers. Then that means bioaccumulation. It means pesticides, as they get passed up that pyramid, they get concentrated. See, that's what we mean by biomagnification. The osprey eats lots of large fish. The large fish eat even more small fish. The small fish even eat more zooplankton. So even if the concentration is, oh God, I don't know, 0.00003 parts per million in the water, then that means the zooplankton have concentrate that into like 0.04. And then the small fish, since, you know, one small fish doesn't eat one zooplankton. It eats many of them. And one large fish doesn't eat one small fish. And one osprey doesn't eat one large fish. So you see what happens, the DDT concentration, the pesticide, whatever the nasty stuff is, gets concentrated. It gets accumulated as you go up the food web. That's why you find pesticides in the blubber tissue or in fat tissue of Eskimos, because the Eskimos eat the whales, and the whales eat, you know, in many cases, well, many species of the whales eat a lot of zooplankton. Those are what we mean about not knowing fully the effects sometimes, right? Because we don't know how it's going to be magnified. Like if I got a hand lens and I'm looking at a piece of paper, oh, okay, everything's being magnified. That's kind of cool. But if I take that outside and take that light that's passing through there and focus it, I can start a fire. You see what I mean? It's like little tiny things that add up. It's that synergism thing again. Although it's really not so synergistic. It's probably just pure math. Well, it is just pure math. Any questions on that? That's real important, folks. That's real important when people say, well, only 0.0859 is being dumped into the environment every year. You're like, okay, is that getting bioaccumulated? Is that being magnified in a food web somehow? That's his non-point source, right? Anything, trash, pesticides, ugh, the beaches, God. You can see what they find, plastics. That's what I mean there, the storm drain. Storm drain water, like let's say storm drain water runs off of a yard that's been fertilized and then drains straight into the ocean, okay? Or drains into a river that drains into the ocean. You see what I mean? That's non-point, that's not being regulated. Excuse me. See what I mean? That's not being regulated. So that we, you know, those kinds of things, those non-point sources, just people throwing garbage on the beach, or I don't know what other might be. I was out at Canaveral National Seashore a couple years ago, and I got a hiking permit to hike north. Like if you drive all the way to the northern part of Canaveral National Seashore, yes, where the nude part of the beach is, but if you walk across and if you get a backcountry permit, you could hike even further going all the way up to Ponce Inlet. And you're like in the middle of nowhere, man. It's so cool. You're out on the beach and there's nobody around. So I'm hiking. I'm literally, I don't know, 3 to 4 miles from that last walkover. So I'm way up the beach. And there's a beauty salon chair. You know what I mean? Like a woman would sit in that she'd put or maybe a guy, didn't have to be a woman, but with the thing over the head to dry the hair, out somewhere on the beach, 3 miles or 3 or 4 miles from, any human. I thought that was so funny and sad at the same time. Okay. So that'd be non-point source pollution. How the heck would that get out there? Plastics is a big thing, like I said. Okay, most of the debris in the ocean, most of the garbage you see, most of it is plastic, something we call flotsam. Here's a poor sea turtle not understanding that this plastic bag is not a jellyfish. See down below? You see the difference. A turtle does not. You can't expect a reptile to be able to process something that's only been developed in the last, I don't know, 100 years or so. Stuff doesn't decompose, it entangles. Horrible stories. I'm sure you've heard about manatees getting monofilament wrapped around their flippers, and it's just causing the flipper to be necrotic and rot off. Just nasty stuff. Plastics, by virtue of what they're made of, are nasty. Okay? Plastics are petroleum products, so they have all that stuff in them. They have all these kinds of hydrocarbon toxins, like we just talked about with DDTs and PCBs and nurdles, microbeads. Nurdles are like the one with the penny. Nurdles are a little bit bigger plastic. That's how they make big pellets, and then they dump it into, melt it and turn it into, all kinds of things. A lot of this stuff gets dumped in the ocean, and because of the ocean and the sand and the way the water moves, this stuff gets polished down like we used to polish rocks as a kid. But, same thing. Some of it's from spillage. If you think about those big container ships out to sea, you wonder how many times one of those containers goes over the side. Microbeads, there's plastic in your toothpaste to help for scrubbing. 46 million pounds, even in the ice. 17.6 billion pounds of plastic each year into the ocean. 17.6. That's horrible. Nuh-uh. That's not what's horrible. Look at that. That's less than 1% of what we produce. Now, some of it, of course, is in, use still, but where's the rest of it? A lot of it's still way out there in the ocean doing gosh knows what. Okay. I went through this one time, maybe not the Eastern Pacific, but like it says, gyres or, areas where the water is turning around and around. You've seen it before, like in the lake. You can gather stuff there. The Eastern Pacific garbage patch, which is bigger than the size of Texas, is caused by gyres. But I went through one in a pretty good size one out in the Pacific going across when I was in the Navy. We would have come more probably towards we might have. But yeah, just huge mats of floating garbage. And it's because of the way the currents are. Estimate 200 million pounds of garbage. And I'm talking about in the middle of the ocean, and you're looking at coolers, wooden pallets, all kinds of garbage that you would never, you're like, oh my goodness, 1,000 miles from sea, and it's like this stuff floating in somebody's beer cooler. Okay, recycle. Less than 10%. We've made pretty good strides in this country, at least, but less than 10% is still recycle. It's all about cost. It's all about convenience. That's why they put out recycling bins, because they want to make it convenient for you. That's human behavior. If you make it easy, then humans will do it. Sometimes. It's also one of the reasons with fossil fuels, they say that when it comes to behaviorists have said that human beings, or Americans specifically, will probably not significantly reduce their consumption of fossil fuels until the price becomes somewhere near $5 a gallon. What is it right now? 2? So all this is figured out behaviorally. But we do have laws, right? There's the International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships, MARPOL, 1988. This says you can't dump stuff over the side. You can't dump certain garbage in the ocean unless someone catches you or sees you. Otherwise, you can dump whatever you want, right? And ratified is good. We've ratified most of it, except something about dumping sewage at sea. I don't know the particular. But again, down below is kind of what it limits to as you go out further to see certain things that can be dumped. But all of this has a lot to do with being able to enforce it. And the ocean is a really big place. And even in those places that we looked at earlier where they're dumping all that garbage, even though they're not dumping it there, except for that one place out to sea, now they're dumping it back on land again. Well, you know, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul kind of thing. So, you know, what is the question again? The question, or what is the response, or what is the real solution? Reduce. Reduce is real. In the meantime, recycle, reuse, but we've got to reduce our dependency on these non-biodegradable materials. But then there's these things. This is what I mean by biological pollution. Now, in Florida, this is a very important topic because of the fact that we live in what we call a subtropical climate. And that means that lots of things from all over the world can live here, right? We got all kinds of different plants and all kinds of different organisms. Cuban tree frogs, right? Those are not from here, they're from Cuba. Air potatoes, not from here, they're from Asia. These are things that get introduced by humans, either, you know, by mistake, accidentally, somebody planting their garden. The zebra mussels, these guys right here, this is the zebra mussel. A mussel is a mollusk. The zebra mussels are native to Asia, all right? And what they do is they reproduce like crazy, and they attach themselves to ships, the hull, which slows them down. They attach themselves to pumps. They foul. It's called fouling. They foul things. They just make a mess out of stuff. You can see that's a pump. It's going to, and if it's going to slow down the passage of water. You know, if it's on the bottom of the hull of a ship, you know, that's kind of, it's drag. It's a resistance. Zebra mussels native to Asia, right? So here's what happened in 1985. Actually, I'm sorry, that's wrong map. It's the green one on the right. We started noticing zebra mussels appearing up in the Great Lakes regions early on. And by November of 2000, they had spread down the Mississippi River and all throughout the Great Lakes. It's in the red. All right, the connection between where they first were noticed spreading, which is right up here, and Asia has to do with iron. What was going on is iron ore ships were moving out of the Great Lakes, taking iron ore through the Panama Canal to Asia. Okay, so when they would get over there, when they would unload the iron ore, they would bring back, you know, whatever cargo they could, but it didn't weigh as much as iron. So some of the stability of the ship, some of the ballast of the ship, what they used was water, right? Ships have those big holding spaces, and if you don't have enough weight, you don't want to be out in the middle of the ocean bobbing around like a cork. You want to be down in the water. That's more stable. So if you don't, if you take an iron ore over, and that's pretty doggone heavy, back and it's all lightened up now, you may have some cargo, you'd use water. Now, when you sucked in that water in Asia, one of the things you sucked in were larval zebra mussels, the larval form. So now you get over to the United States, you offload your cargo, you can offload the water, you spit that water back out, and you've dumped all those larvae back into the Great Lakes region. So that's why the detective work is kind of cool, all right? Detective work is like, here's where they started, here's where they spread. How did they start? They started because of these ships dumping their ballast water, okay? I see that I'm just about to run out of time, so let me finish this last slide, and then we have one more, and that's it. Invasive species, there's a difference between invasive and exotic. Exotic means it's not supposed to live here, okay? It's not normally found here, but it's usually not a problem. Invasive means it's a problem. Invasive means it's out competing. Zebra mussels would be an invasive. Lionfish, which you can see have spread since 1985. There are even groups that go down there and as teams and hunt these things. That's a lionfish on the right. Lionfish do really well in Florida waters. Okay, that's an exotic and an invasive. So there's a difference between the two. The invasives we're really concerned about because they kill off our natives. Okay, I got one more slide, but I can always pick that up next time, unless you guys got a couple more minutes and I can finish up. It's up to you. If you have to go, then I understand. Of course, this is being recorded. This is the last one. All right, the law on the ocean. I think this is kind of neat. In 1609, we came up with this idea of what how we were going to define our, what's ours as far as the ocean goes. Does it end right at the beach? How far does it go out? And a lot of it had to do with what I was saying earlier, is where the fish were. So you wanted to protect where the fish were because you wanted to, that was your resource. But back then there were fewer people and a lot of fish, so it was okay. We didn't mind sharing, and and the occasional encroachment wasn't that big a deal. Okay, so and then of course the idea is, what if two countries are very close to one another? Where do they split the water? All right, so in 1702 they came up with this idea called de domino maris. Maris means water. That's domain over the water, dominion over the water, and it says your waters, your territorial waters are 3 miles. What's really cool about that, I didn't know that till I looked in your book, it has to do with how far a British cannon could fire at a ship. The longest range was 3 miles. So your territorial waters were what you could defend, which I think is kind of neat. It's the same word that we use in biology. In biology, organisms have a home range, that's where they go, and then they have a territory, which is smaller, and that's what they'll defend. All right, so it's kind of cool. Now, as things changed and countries could spy on each other, 3 miles wasn't really enough because you could, get a lot of intelligence 3 miles away if it was militarily. And we didn't have an exhaustible water supply or fish supply. And just because it's 3 miles, does that mean I want some other country dumping their garbage 3.5 miles or 3.25 miles offshore? Right? So all of this became even stickier. 1958, the UN got involved with this idea of the law of the sea. It covers all kinds of things because we found there's lots of minerals in the ocean, any kind of mining. It's all under the country that's nearest the land. And again, when countries are close together, that becomes a problem. We surprisingly have not signed this. We surprisingly have not signed this United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea because we have some issue with regulations. I'm sure it has to do with more of a free market enterprise than anything, right? We have a lot of business has a lot of control over sometimes what we do legally. Law of the Sea says that territorial waters are 12 miles. You have an EEZ, which is it's all yours, 200 miles, or depending upon the size of the continental shelf. All right, if your continental shelf is over 350 miles, then it stops at 350. Otherwise, it's 200 miles. Each country has jurisdiction, mineral rights, oil, gold, whatever kind of nickel, any of that sort of stuff. You got to take care of the place. It's you got to control the pollution, which, right? Maybe you do it well, maybe you don't do it so well. You got to let everybody else sell by. You got to let them go through. And this is, of course, very important in areas that are close together, and that's where we get a lot of conflict sometimes. That's when countries aren't getting along with one another. And of course, a tribunal, which many times becomes nothing more than a debating site to society. A tribunal, when you get together, like the UN can say, we condemn you, but that doesn't mean you got to go sit in the corner. You can still do whatever you want. Half of the oceans are under control of coastal nations. So about half of the ocean. So we control about that, including this little thing, again, that I was talking about, this mining thing that they're using for mining the ocean. So half of the oceans are controlled under coastal nations involving all these laws. And they all become very sometimes convoluted and tied up in each other sometimes. So like anything in the law, right? Thank you guys for being patient. Let me stop the recording.